Good evening. We begin tonight with breaking news. Senate Republicans tonight unified in blocking further action on sweeping voting legislation backed by Democrats. By withholding the 10 votes needed to break a filibuster, though, they didn't really vote the bill down, nor did they vote against having a vote on the bill. All they did, which was enough under the rules of the Senate, was to defeat a motion to proceed with S1, what Democrats call the For the People Act. In other words, agree or disagree with what's in the bill, what Republicans did tonight was foreclose any possibility of even opening debate on it. Now, none of this was unexpected or particularly unusual, except perhaps for the degree of the nothing to see here folks coming from Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. Nothing to see in his view, and nothing for the federal government to do about it.
I'm okay with the states sorting this sort of stuff out. You know, the most important election in the country is the presidential election. It's not decided in Congress, it's decided in the Electoral College. Those are state-by-state decisions. And so, regardless of what may be happening in some state, there's no rationale for federal intervention. They'll figure it all out. They'll go to court. They'll determine whether or not there's any rational basis for this. That's not unusual in this country.
It's not unusual in this country, he says, for states to work it all out. And it's true that many things like this do ultimately end up getting worked out in courts. But then, in the next breath, literally 1 minute later, he says there's really nothing to work out.
There's nothing broken around the country. The system upheld very well during intense stress in the latter part of the previous Congress. There's no rational basis for federalizing this election. Therefore, there's no point in having an election in the U.S., a debate in the U.S. Senate about something we ought not to do.
Those two thoughts, nothing's broken and let the states work it out, are the Republican strategy in a nutshell. But keep it honest, it can't really be both. I mean, there is one way it could be. Both statements could be true if Republicans across the country accepted the fact that there was no widespread fraud in the last election, that a record number of people in both parties made their voices heard in the middle of the worst public health emergency in a century, that in this vital respect, nothing was really broken. But they don't. If Republicans accepted that reality, truly nothing was broken, then why are GOP-controlled state legislatures finding so much they say they need to fix? If everything's A-OK, then why, according to the Brennan Center, have at least 14 states already enacted 22 new laws as of May of this year limiting access to the vote, largely based on non-existent voter fraud? If nothing's broken, why are Republican state lawmakers foisting sham ballot audits on Democratic-leaning counties in already certified elections? I mean, if he truly thinks that nothing is broken, perhaps Senator McConnell should speak to guys like this Republican elected official from Georgia who ended his non-broken 2020 experience with his very own security detail due to death threats, who spent part of his tenure literally begging the President of the United States to stop inciting violence with his election lies.
Mr. President, it looks like you likely lost the state of Georgia. We're investigating. There's always a possibility. I get it. And you have the rights to go through the courts. What you don't have the ability to do, and you need to step up and say this, is stop inspiring people to commit potential acts of violence. Someone's going to get hurt. Someone's going to get shot. Someone's going to get killed. And it's not right. It's not right.
At this moment, a judge in the state is weighing demands to set up an Arizona-style sham audit there. If nothing's broken, why is this even in front of a judge? And of course, if nothing's broken, seems to think his party benefits from. Some portions of Senate Bill 1 would have prevented the kind of voter restriction laws we're seeing across the country. Others would have established federal standards for early and mail-in voting, putting all states on a level playing field. Yet other language would have put redistricting into the hands of bipartisan commissions, chosen not by the federal government, as some GOP senators have falsely claimed, but by the states themselves. And of course, Republicans, had they voted to begin debate on it, might have demanded that parts of the bill be changed, removed, or replaced, and they might have gotten at least some of what they wanted. But they chose instead not to talk at all, and that makes a statement too. Let's go for more on all of this now from CNN's Ryan Nobles at the Capitol for us tonight. So getting to 50 was the best case scenario for Democrats going into this vote. Sure, they'll be able to say, well, they were united, but they still failed to move the bill. It's dead. What happens now?
You're right, Anderson. This bill is not moving forward, and that is a huge blow to many Democratic activists across the country who listed this among their highest priorities in this session of Congress. And, you know, the Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said that they are not giving up, that they have a number of avenues to try and pass some form of this legislation in the near future, but he hasn't outlined exactly how they get there. And the big obstacle remains the fact that the Senate filibuster remains in place, and that there are a small group of Democratic senators who are unwilling to break that up for anything, even something they consider to be their biggest priority. And that includes West Virginia's Joe Manchin and Arizona's Senator Kyrsten Sinema, who have both said that the filibuster, breaking it up now, would lead to long-term consequences that they just don't want to entertain. So Chuck Schumer can continue to tell his base that he's not giving up on this, but right now he has yet to outline a true path to getting there without convincing those wayward senators that they need to break the filibuster, and they need to do it now.
There are progressive Democrats who believe that President Biden and Vice President Harris should have done more to get this passed. Now, the Vice President spoke after the vote. What did she have to say?
Yeah, you're right, Anderson. I've talked to a lot of progressive Democrats, particularly in the House of Representatives, that are really upset with President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris that they weren't more forceful in using the bully pulpit of the White House to try and encourage Democrats to do everything they possibly could to get this passed in the Senate. Harris pushed back on that after the vote today. Listen to what she said.
I am here today, and I was here today because obviously this is one of the most critical issues that the United States Congress could take up, which is about the fundamental right to vote in our country. And I think it is clear, certainly for the American people, that when we're talking about the right to vote, it is not a Republican concern or a Democratic concern. It is an American concern. This is about the American people's right to vote, unfettered. It is about their access to the right to vote in a meaningful way. Because nobody is debating, I don't believe, whether all Americans have the right to vote. The issue here is there actual access to the voting process, or is that being impeded? And the bottom line is that the President and I are very clear. We support S1, we support the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and the fight is not over.
Harris didn't answer any questions after making that statement, Anderson, but what most reporters were asking is, yes, you support it. What's your plan for getting it passed? And right now, the Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, the White House, President Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, they don't seem to have an answer to that question. And I talked to Pramila Jayapal. She's the chair of the Progressive Caucus in the House tonight. She said that the patience is wearing thin, particularly with progressive members of the House who want to see action. They're done listening to the words. They need to see action behind those words.
Ryan Nobles, appreciate it. Let's get perspective now from Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. I spoke to him just before airtime. Senator Coons, is it clear to you why Senator Manchin waited so long to put forward his version of an acceptable voting rights bill? I mean, if he'd done that sooner, do you think you could have actually gotten some Republicans on board?
Well, I don't know if there's anything we can do to get Republicans on board with protecting access to the ballot with voting rights. But I'll remind you, Anderson, that the restrictive laws that are being passed now in states across the country, states like Georgia and Arizona, they're trying to do it in Texas, they hurt voters, both Republicans and Democrats alike. They make it harder to access the ballot box. They make it harder to vote under conditions not just like the pandemic, but in ordinary times. So the kinds of reforms that the For the People Act would have put in place would have guaranteed better, broader access to the right to vote for Americans of all backgrounds and both parties. I think if Joe Manchin had come forward with a clear proposal earlier, we might have sharpened the focus today, but the outcome still would have likely been the same. 50 Democrats supporting moving ahead with it, 50 Republicans opposed.
So what happens now? I mean, if there's no chance really of getting Republicans on board, and Manchin and Sinema have said they will not support eliminating the filibuster, is this just no longer is this just dead?
Well, Anderson, the Rules Committee, which has responsibility for elections, is going to have a series of hearings, both about the laws that are being passed around the country and about the provisions that could be included if this is taken up again. A number of us are going to reach out to Republicans and see if there is any path forward. But frankly, given the facts as you just stated them, Anderson, I'm gravely concerned that this will be a green light to Republicans, particularly in state legislators around the country, to move ahead with more steps that will restrict the right to vote.
I mean, there's nothing Democrats in Congress can do about it, you're saying?
Well, unless we change the filibuster, and we've got at least 2 members who are publicly saying they won't do that. Having this vote today was an important part of having a discussion in our caucus about whether or not we're willing to change that position and instead move forward with just 51 votes for something as important as protecting access to the right to vote.
But you have no confidence that this will move them.
I don't know that yet, Anderson. We're having robust debates within our caucus about that. There is right now an ongoing effort at Bipartisan Progress on infrastructure, on policing reform, but on this issue, on voting rights, there is a very clear 50-50 split between Democrats and Republicans in the Congress. And because the right to vote is so foundational, so defining of our democracy, I remain hopeful that we may yet persuade folks to change position.
Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell, when asked about the so-called audit that's been going on of 2020 election ballots in Arizona, which is really not a legitimate audit at all, said today he's okay with states sorting this stuff out and there's no role for Congress in election laws. Are you okay with that?
Well, Anderson, the audit in Arizona is searching for some shred of evidence of voter fraud or of vote irregularities. President Biden won Maricopa County by 45,000 votes, and after months and months of effort and several attempts at this audit, no significant evidence has come forward. I do think it's important that we take action federally to ensure that the guardrails of our elections are strong. I think we should look back at the 2020 election and be improving access to the ballot and the ability of states to ensure that the will of the electorate is respected, rather than some of the steps that are being taken, as in Arizona, to re-litigate through an audit the election of 2020.
There's a lot of Democrats who see what happened today on voting rights and are obviously very upset. Earlier today, progressive Democratic Congressman Jamal Bowman of New York said that President Biden needs to be more vocal, a lot more vocal, out front on voting rights. You're obviously one of the president's closest allies in the Senate. Was he involved enough in these negotiations? Is there something more he can do?
Look, President Biden has been clear, has been forceful, and has been engaged about the importance of protecting the right to vote. Vice President Harris and President Biden have spoken to senators, have spoken out publicly, have used their bully pulpit in social media, in person and on camera. But I do think there's more work for all of us to do. If it's going to be harder for us to win elections going forward, then we're simply going to have to work harder to demonstrate that we're delivering results for the American people, and to take the fight to state legislatures around the country and to try and persuade folks, both in our caucus and nationally, that the right to vote is too precious a thing to allow it to be taken away by state legislatures around the country.
Senator Chris Coons, I appreciate your time. Thanks.
Thank you, Anderson.
Well, next, breaking news and what we've just learned about how House Speaker Pelosi plans to investigate the unified and successful Republican effort to block debate on voting rights legislation. You heard Senate Minority Leader McConnell proclaiming election normalcy in this country. Nothing is broken, he said. No need for what he called federal intervention. Well, tonight there's someone he might want to talk to, the guy who supplies the ballots in Arizona's Maricopa County, the same ballots being scrutinized for Chinese bamboo or copied and shipped to Montana or heaven knows what else. CNN's Kyung La met the man, visited his company, and has this report.
In these final days of the so-called Arizona audit, the focus is on the ballot paper itself. As we peek in from our perch in the nosebleed press box, we see workers photographing the nearly 2.1 million 2020 ballots cast in Maricopa County, using multiple microscopic cameras to zoom in on the paper. It's a mystery what this is all about to us and to Jeff Ellington.
What are they looking for?
Don't know. Wish we knew.
Ellington would know if something was wrong with the ballot paper. He's the president and CEO of Runbeck Election Services. Nearly every single 2020 printed ballot from Maricopa County, Arizona was produced here at Runbeck, an airtight, secured 90,000 square foot facility where every ballot is barcoded, sorted, and assembled, and the specialty paper itself cut and measured to the nanometer.
This is ballot paper.
So this has to be specially made.
It's heavy, it's hard to ship. I mean, the stuff, 1,000 pounds for each one of these rolls, but we don't have paper made out of bamboo.
Bamboo in ballot paper has been a wild conspiracy the controversial audit has chased.
There's a lot of accusations that were said about the ballots coming from China, bamboo in the paper, that 40,000 ballots came in that were forged or whatever.
My first response was, there's no way.
But as this unorthodox audit continued and Ellington watched workers use UV lights on the ballots Runbeck printed, it started getting to him.
So we're like, well, maybe there is something. So we went in a room like this and we got our flashlight and we were shining it on the paper trying to figure out what they could possibly be looking for. We couldn't find anything on the ballot that reflected or was a watermark or anything.
This is what it's come to.
Yeah, this is what it has come to.
I think that this is an exercise in just nonsense.
Stephen Richer is a Republican Maricopa County recorder, loudly denouncing this partisan exercise by the Republican-controlled Arizona Senate and what this will mean for American democracy.
You're going to have division, and we're not going to have moved the needle at all, and we're going to give in further oxygen to some of these absurd conspiracy theories. And so, I don't see what the end game is here, and I don't see how this really helps.
Or makes any sense at all, says Ellington.
In 2016, you did the ballots.
Correct.
In 2020, you did the ballots.
Yes, for Maricopa County, we did the ballots in both elections.
So what changed between 2016 and 2020 that there's now this outrage in 2020?
The outcome?
King Law joins us now from Phoenix. So what are you learning about when and how this so-called report of this so-called audit will be unveiled?
Well, when we spoke about this last night, Anderson, we were hearing that it could be late July, early August, and there's a lot of this guessing game, a lot of this uncertainty, because Arizona's Senate President Karen Fann isn't exactly talking to a lot of election officials here in Arizona like they anticipated. Another source is telling us it could be 60 days. That's the last word that they got, that it could be 60 days before they figure out what is going to be revealed, what it's going to look like, and what it could mean for the voters here in Arizona and in Maricopa County specifically, Anderson. That, though, creates a lot of uncertainty to have all that time, that gap, as this question and all these conspiracies are still swirling out here, Anderson.
Young Law, appreciate it. Thanks. More now on the effort to spread these sham audits. Jenna Griswold, Colorado's Secretary of State, recently took action to head off a push for them in her state. Some of the demands have apparently been inspired by the privately run audit in Arizona. And Secretary Griswold joins us now. So, Madam Secretary, I appreciate you being with us. I want to get your thoughts on the situation in Arizona and what it's prompted you to do in Colorado. But first, I just want to get your reaction to the breaking news out of Washington, the failure of the Senate along partisan lines to move forward a federal voting rights bill. Senator McConnell is saying it's not necessary. This is something that should just be left up to the states and go through the courts if necessary.
Well, Anderson, thank you for having me on. My reaction from what happened in D.C. is Democrats are united in protecting voting rights, and Senate Republicans are united in allowing states to suppress their voters. And that's what we're seeing across the nation, a concerted effort, coordinated to undermine democracy and then justify the passing of voter suppression. So I believe that it's urgent that we do have the Senate take action and really call on every single senator to do a carve out of the filibuster. We cannot allow the filibuster to be the reason that democracy is destroyed by these voter suppression tactics, these fake audits, and literally insurrectionists running to be the chief election officers of states as Secretary of State.
Isn't there an argument to be made, though, just arguing the other side here, that there's a reason the system is set up the way it is, and if, for those who didn't like the former president, had the federal government been able to have a one-size-fits-all policy for how the election should be run in each state, there could have been something done untoward by the former president, whereas the fact that this is done on a state-by-state basis and states make up their rules about the voting rules, isn't there some protection for voters in that?
Well, what voters need is protection and the freedom to cast a ballot in fair, secure, and accessible elections. And what we are seeing is that our freedoms are being under attack in state legislatures across the nation. And I believe that every American deserves access to have their voice heard in elections, regardless of the color of their skin, the amount of money in their bank account, or where their zip code is. So I disagree with that assessment. We're at an urgency point for our democracy. And what federal legislation would do would not say you have to run your elections this, that, and the other way, and that's it. It would put a floor in so that states and partisan elected officials stop suppressing their voters. And Anderson, with these voter suppression bills, it's not only about taking away Americans' freedoms, it's about partisan GOP members trying to tilt future elections in their favor. That's about as un-American as you can get.
You heard the latest from Kim La on the so-called audit in Maricopa County. You took sort of a preemptive action in Colorado. There was reportedly a conservative group seeking to do something similar with your ballots. Can you explain what was going on and what you did?
Yeah, so in Colorado, our local county election officials were getting pressured to run these sham audits. And at times, they were getting pressured with threats. And I believe that in Colorado, we need to take action to protect our democracy. That is how I see my role as Secretary of State. So I issued rules prohibiting sham audits in the state. We're not going to allow unprofessional, unaccredited firms with no experience in elections to get a hold of our voting equipment. And on top of that, we already have the best audits in the nation. They're bipartisan risk-limiting audits that show us to a statistical degree of certainty that outcomes are correct. But I think we should make it really clear what these sham audits are trying to do. They are trying to undermine confidence in elections. And through the undermining of confidence in elections, some of these partisan GOP members are really setting the stage for further voter suppression. And lastly, I think it's noteworthy that although we're seeing these types of fraudits spread across the nation, although we're seeing voter suppression, and Senate Republicans really refuse to move to protect the right to vote, American voters, including Republican American voters, support the reforms in the For the People Act, support the idea that every American should have access to making our voices heard and choosing our elected leaders.
We should also point out, just in the last election, there was a record turnout on both sides. It was actually a very successful election for Republicans in state houses across the country. A huge turnout on both sides. So the idea that you know this should be a partisan issue it's very strange. Jenna Griswold, I appreciate your time. Thank you. Want to quickly have some more breaking news right now. CNN has learned from two sources familiar with the subject that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is expected to appoint a select committee to investigate the January insurrection. They tell us she said so this evening to Democrats on the chamber's Steering and Policy Committee. One source telling us the Speaker indicated she believes a regular standing committee of several dozen members just would not work, and notes the House has already given the Senate several weeks to get a bill on an independent commission, something Republicans have blocked. Speaker Pelosi later denied that she had made a decision. CNN stands by its reporting and the sources who confirmed her initial reports. Next, breaking news. Polls close shortly in the New York City mayoral primary, the latest on a race that could have a long, drawn-out ending when we continue. There's breaking news about half an hour from now. Polls in New York close, an end to a rough, sometimes bitter party nomination process to elect a new mayor. The Democratic nominee is expected to win in November and then lead a far different New York than the one of just a year ago. But it may be a while before we learn which of the 13 candidates that is. Our national correspondent, Athena Jones, joins us now with the latest. So it's a big field. It's been a tough campaign, even by New York standards. Any sense of how the candidates are feeling tonight?
Hi, Anderson. You're right. It has been a long campaign. It's gotten bitter, especially towards the end. There are 13 candidates vying for the Democratic nomination, but there are really 4 names that have risen to the top in the limited public polling we've been looking at in the last few weeks. And those are, in fact, the names that we've been hearing the most here at this polling place in the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and also at a polling place my colleagues were at in Crown Heights in Brooklyn. Those names are Eric Adams, who is the Brooklyn Borough President. He's a former New York police captain. He appears to be leading the polls, but of course this race is hard to poll due to the ranked choice voting aspect. He's a name we're hearing a lot. Also, Catherine Garcia, the former sanitation commissioner who worked under Bill de Blasio, the current mayor, and former Mayor Michael Bloomberg. A lot of people have mentioned ranking her first. Also, Maya Wiley, she's a civil rights lawyer who was counsel to the current mayor, Bill de Blasio. She's a name that's come up a lot here at this polling place and the one in Crown Heights in Brooklyn. And Andrew Yang, the businessman and former 2020 presidential candidate. Those are the four candidates that appear to have risen to the top here. It's going to be weeks before we find out who's ultimately the winner. But these are folks who are projecting confidence at the end. Eric Adams in the last few days and hours saying, I never doubted that I would win. Of course, we won't know tonight if he did win, but he's projecting confidence, sharing some of the union support and others who have been making calls for him, helping to get out the vote. Wiley and Garcia both tweet, and Yang tweeting about how the polls are about to close in less than an hour now, urging their voters to get out and have their voices heard. So there's a reason for confidence, but this has been a difficult race to poll because we don't know how much movement is going on when it comes to people figuring out or strategizing about who to rank first, second, and third, and how that's ultimately going to affect the tabulation.
Yeah, Athena Jones, appreciate it. Thank you. Want to get perspective now from Christine Quinn, former Speaker of the New York City Council, who ran for mayor in 2013, and Harry Enton, CNN senior political writer and analyst. Christine, great to see you. What was going through your mind on primary night when you were a candidate for mayor, and what do you expect is going on inside these campaigns tonight? Because, I mean, this is unlike anything we've seen in New York. I mean, this whole system is confusing.
You know, I didn't get the results I wanted on primary night, but at least I knew, and it was over. So, you know, and so for these folks, I cannot imagine 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks of waiting and waiting. That's really challenging. And are they going to keep campaigning? How much of a presence are they going to have? It's a totally different world. And my heart kind of goes out to them because it's going to be hard to not know.
Harry, can you walk us through in any way that's comprehensible how the primary process works? And, I mean, if I drank, I would have a drink right now while you do this, but I'm just going to have to listen here sober.
Look, it may be a candidate's nightmare, but it's a journalist's dream to be able to explain such a complex system such as this. Look, here's the situation, right? You're going to rank up to 5 candidates on your ballot, right? Some people, like my mom, may rank 2 or 3. You can rank any number that you want. So you rank up to 5. Then essentially what happens is, if no one reaches a majority of the vote, and it's very unlikely that anyone will, we'll start eliminating folks one by one. If you have the lowest share of the vote, you get eliminated. Your votes go to your second choice, your third choice, your fourth choice. But here's the key thing to keep in mind as you're watching the results as they come in. If the candidate that's ahead is with less than 40% of the vote, which is very likely, and their lead is 10 points or greater, that candidate is very, very likely to win based upon history. They've won 100% of the time in ranked choice voting elections in the United States since 2000. But if, let's say, the leader has less than 40 and is ahead by less than 10 points, that leader has only won 72% of the time. So essentially what we're really looking at here is, let's see where the leader is. If it's a close race, if it's less than 10 points between the first place and the second place person, we really could be waiting a long time to figure out who wins. But if that first place person's ahead by, let's say, 15 points, that person is very, very likely to win.
I would watch a show, Harry, of you and your mom talking New York politics. I would watch that show. I don't know your mom, but I would watch that.
She is a lovely person. She's a great pediatrician. And, you know, we used to go to the voting booth and have Stella Dora cookies with the old Jewish ladies. It was beautiful.
Christine, so much of this election is centered on crime, which is obviously a rising concern in cities nationwide, very much so in New York, which has seen, you know, record low crime. For somebody who, you know, I grew up in New York in the 70s, it was a very different New York. Do you expect this primary to be an indicator of the kind of candidates and platforms that get traction around the country?
Well, you know, there's a lot of discussion about that because I think if you'd had a conversation about how would crime and police play in this election, say 6 months ago, we all would have said it's going to focus on police-community relations, police brutality, etc. That's really shifted, and it's a more traditional conversation about crime being on the rise, and violence being up in the city, except, as you just referenced, it is nowhere near at all the quote-unquote bad old days, you know, the Bronx is burning, etc. Nonetheless, I think younger people in this city are so used to there being no crime at all the increase really has them shook, and we're seeing that in how the discussion has changed. And even older voters have become so used to super low crime. This new increase has really had them rethink how they see this issue, and that's really a big reason why Eric Adams is doing so well, given his history of having been a police captain, and he's running on a hard-on crime, lock 'em up kind of a platform.
Harry, Athena in her report noted it's going to take a while before we know who wins. Can you just when are we going to actually find out?
It could be weeks. Look, we'll get an idea of what the first choice selections are this evening, right? But that will only be the in-person voting. That does not count the absentees. Then a week from now, we'll get some ranked choice results from the in-person voting. But again, not counting those absentee mail ballots. It's not going to be till July 6th that we'll have ranked choice results, including some mail ballots, which may very well total 100,000 or more. And finally, it won't be until July 12th the week of July 12th, that official results should be expected. So perhaps we should all go to a diner, get some coffee a few times each week, and we can discuss the results there.
I like that idea. Harry Enton, thank you. Christine Quinn, great to see you. Thanks. Sorry, what, Christine?
Yep. I was going to say lots of good conversation for your July 4th barbecue.
That's certainly true. Thanks so much. Just ahead, more breaking news. Dr. Anthony Fauci warns about the threat posed by a coronavirus variant that very well may become the dominant strain in the United States, just as young people in certain states are lagging behind the rest of the nation when it comes to vaccinations, what it means for the rest of us as well when we continue. More breaking news tonight. Federal health officials warning of a serious uptick in the prevalence of a coronavirus variant first seen in India. Compounding the problem, younger adults in certain states not getting vaccinated at high enough rates.
The Delta variant is currently the greatest threat in the U.S. to our attempt to eliminate COVID-19. Good news, our vaccines are effective against the Delta variant. There is a danger, a real danger, that if there is a persistence of a recalcitrance to getting vaccinated, that you could see localized surges.
Dr. Fauci added that this variant is doubling every 2 weeks in the U.S., now accounting for about 20% of tested samples. Let's get perspective now from Dr. Paul Offit, director of the Vaccine Education Center at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Dr. Offit, I remember, I don't know if it was a week ago or a couple weeks ago, it was at 10% of the cases in the U.S. were this Delta variant. Now we're saying 20. This is, what's to stop this from becoming the dominant variant in this country as it has in other countries?
Well, vaccines are what stop it, and unfortunately we have a fairly large percentage of the population that is still choosing not to vaccinate. I don't know why we need to keep learning this lesson. The first virus that came out of China was the first variant. It didn't have a Greek letter designation, but it's the one that swept across Europe. It's the one that swept across this country and killed more than 500,000 people. That was then replaced by this second variant, the so-called Alpha variant, or the UK variant, which now is the dominant strain, and now we have the third variant, the Delta variant. What this virus is doing, this bad coronavirus, is it's trying to become more and more adapted to growth in people. Therefore, it becomes more contagious. And the more contagious it is, the greater percentage of the population that you need to vaccinate. As Dr. Fauci said, we're not helpless here. Just get vaccinated. Unfortunately, there are too many people who are not making that choice.
Yeah, there's this guy, Cole Beasley, in what he termed a public service announcement. He's an NFL player. He tweeted this weekend, and I quote, "I'm not vaccinated. I will be outside doing what I do. I'll be out in the public. If you're scared of me, then steer clear or get vaccinated. Point blank, period. I may die of COVID, but I'd rather die actually living." What do you do? What do you do with somebody like this?
So here's a man, wide receiver for the Buffalo Bills, who's saying, it's my choice, it's my personal choice, but it's really not his personal choice because he's making a choice for those with whom he comes in contact. He makes two flawed arguments. One is that what do you care? If you're vaccinated, you're good, but no vaccine is 100% effective, and even though people are vaccinated, it's possible they could get sick, so you need everybody around you to be as highly vaccinated as possible. And the second thing is there are hundreds of thousands of people in this country who can't be vaccinated because they're getting chemotherapy for their cancers or they're getting biological agents for their chronic diseases. They depend on those around them to protect them. And if enough enough people are like Cole Beasley and saying, the hell with you, I'm going to do what I want, then you're going to have the continued spread of this virus, continued suffering and hospitalization and death, and worse yet, continued generation of variants, which makes it harder and harder to get on top of this. There are two things that are working against us here. One are the variants, and the other is essentially this sort of anti-vaccine attitude, which is, or said another way, a pro-disease attitude.
Also, this guy who, clearly thinks he's tough and is showing himself off to be how tough he is, when he gets sick, he's going to end up in a hospital. He's going to go to a hospital where doctors and nurses are going to have to waste their time attending to him because he chose not to have a vaccine. And then at some point, right before he's put on a ventilator, he will make a public service announcement saying, oh, gosh, I really, should have got a vaccine. I thought it was meaningless to have a vaccine. It's even worse to be on a ventilator. It just seems like such a obnoxious way to think because, frankly, he doesn't live in a bubble, and he is going to, medical attention is going to have to be paid for him. If he gets really sick, people are going to have to waste their time, attending to him when they could have been attending to other people. And children aren't getting vaccinated. Little kids aren't getting vaccinated. And even people who have mild cases often have long-haul symptoms for many, many months. I mean, there's so many reasons why his argument is just asinine.
No, you're right. And the story that you just told is a story that has played out before, where people have said on their deathbed that they regretted not getting a vaccine. I mean, it's just a lesson that I find continually amazed that we're unable to learn. Also, when Cole Beasley plays football, he wears a helmet, he wears shoulder pads. Why? Because he's trying to prevent injury. This is really no different. He uses preventive measures on the football field, so why not here?
Yeah. Dr. Offit, I appreciate your time, as always. Thank you. Up next, as President Biden prepares to address